Good afternoon. The Secretary General will preview the meeting of Defence Ministers and then he will be here to take your questions. Secretary General.
Good afternoon. NATO Defence Ministers will meet this week to prepare our summit in Vilnius next month. We meet as Ukraine is conducting a major counter-offensive. It is still early days, and we do not know if this will be a turning point of the war. But we see that the Ukrainians are making advances and liberating more land. We know that the more gains Ukraine makes, the stronger their hand will be at the negotiating table. The more gains Ukraine makes, the more likely it will be that President Putin realizes he cannot win on the battlefield, but has to negotiate a just peace. The progress we see is a testament to the courage and commitment of the Ukrainian forces. It also demonstrates that the support provided by NATO allies is making a real difference on the battlefield as we speak. We will start our ministerial with a meeting of the NATO-Ukraine Commission, which will be preceded by the Ukraine Defence Contact Group led by the United States. Together with Defence Minister Resnikov, we will address developments on the ground and how to sustain our support. We will discuss a multi-year package of support with substantial funding to ensure Ukraine can defend itself for the longer term, to transition from Soviet era to NATO standards and achieve full interoperability with NATO, and to reform and rebuild its security and defense sector. We must ensure that when this war ends, there are credible arrangements in place for Ukraine's security, so that history does not repeat itself, and so that Russia cannot rest, rearm, and relaunch a fresh attack. At the Vilnius summit, we will send a strong message of support and solidarity with Ukraine, and make clear that Ukraine's future is in NATO. This week, ministers will also address how to further strengthen NATO's deterrence and defense, with new regional plans to defend allied territory, with forces and capabilities, and high levels of readiness. The regional plans require a new NATO force structure. This will provide well over 300,000 troops at high readiness, backed by substantial air and naval power. We will also adapt our command and control arrangements so that we can exercise the new regional plans and put them into practice if necessary. I also expect ministers will agree to establish a new NATO maritime center for the security of critical undersea infrastructure within our maritime command in the United Kingdom. The center will increase our situational awareness and enhance maritime presence for deterrence and defense. We are not starting from scratch. All of this work builds on the biggest adaptation of collective defense in a generation. We started almost a decade ago in response to Russia's illegal annexation of Crimea in 2014. And we must continue to adapt at pace. At the ministerial, we will continue our long-standing engagement with the transatlantic defense industry. We have invited small, medium and large defense producers from across the alliance to an informal event. This will enable defense ministers to discuss directly with industry how best to ramp up production, secure our supply chains, and remove barriers to cooperation. Ukraine and the European Union will also take part in the event. I expect that defense ministers will review a new defense production action plan, which leaders will agree at the summit in Vilnius. It aims to rapidly address shortfalls in our stocks, building on $1 billion in joint procurement just for 155mm ammunition, now underway this year by our NATO Support and Procurement Agency, NSBA. The plan also aims to enhance the interoperability of our ammunition and equipment and support the transatlantic defense industrial base. We have also completed an exceptional review of national capability targets for battle-decisive ammunition. As a result, I expect ministers on Friday will decide to increase these targets substantially. This will strengthen both our ability to defend ourselves and to support Ukraine, and it will send a clear signal to industry to boost production. We will also address a renewed defense investment pledge for the Vilnius summit. This should make clear that investing 2% of GDP on defense is not a ceiling to reach, but a floor we must build on. Finally, we will hold a meeting of the Nuclear Planning Group. We continue to see reckless nuclear rhetoric from Russia. And just over the past few months, Moscow has suspended participation in the New START treaty and has decided to deploy nuclear weapons in Belarus. Ministers will discuss the nuclear aspects of the current security environment and consider the ongoing adaptation of NATO's nuclear deterrence. With that, I'm ready for your questions.
Okay, we'll start with Bloomberg.
Natalia Drozdiak, thank you for the question. Are you confident that allies will agree to wording on Ukraine's membership by Vilnius that goes beyond the 2008 statement?
There are consultations going on now, and I think I will only make those consultations more difficult if I go into the different elements or preempt the conclusions. But what I can say is that allies actually agree on a lot when it comes to Ukraine's membership in NATO. First of all, we agree that NATO's door is open. And that has been demonstrated by the fact that we just at the last summit invited both Finland and Sweden to become full members. We also agree that Ukraine will become a member of the alliance. That has been stated again and again by NATO allies. And thirdly, we all agree that it is for Ukraine and the NATO allies to decide when the time is right for Ukraine to become a member of the alliance. But perhaps most importantly, we agree that the most urgent task now is to ensure that Ukraine prevails as a sovereign independent nation. Because unless Ukraine prevails and can continue as a democratic state in Europe, there is no membership issue to be discussed at all. And then I also expect that allies will agree a multi-year program where we help to move Ukraine to transition from Soviet standards, equipment, procedures, doctrines, to NATO standards and become fully interoperable with NATO. And by doing that, of course, we are bringing Ukraine closer to NATO. So consultations are ongoing. I'm confident that we'll find a good solution at the summit. And the starting point is actually that allies agree on a lot when it comes to membership.
Ukraine Forum.
Dmytro Shkurko, National News Agency of Ukraine, thank you for the floor. It's known that member states have different positions on guarantees or insurances of security for Ukraine for the future. Will that question be discussed during the ministerial this time with Minister Reznikov? And what options are on the table, if it's possible? And a second follow-up question, quite technical, if I may. There was said that NATO is going to upgrade the status of NATO-Ukraine Commission to the range of Council. What is the difference? And could you please specify if NRC is still existing? Thank you.
Well, there is a big difference between a commission and a council when it comes to NATO and NATO structures, because a commission, that's the allies meeting one partner. So in the NATO-Ukraine Commission, we meet 31 allies with Ukraine. We don't make decisions, we don't have structures, it's a platform to consult with a partner. If allies agree to establish a NATO-Ukraine Council, that actually means that we then will be 32 equals. It will be the 31 allies and Ukraine sitting around the same table at equal terms. And it will be also a body that can make decisions, and we can also have deeper structures under subcommittees and so on. So that's the structure for much deeper cooperation, for actually making decisions together if all members of the Council agree, and it will reflect a very strong strengthening of the political partnership relationship between Ukraine and the NATO allies, and it will be on equal levels. Then, of course, with Minister Reznikov in the room, I expect that we will discuss both urgent needs and more long-term challenges for Ukraine. The urgent need, the most obvious need, is of course to ensure that they have the weapons, the ammunition, the supplies, the maintenance to continue to conduct the offensive. And as you all know, this is not only about deploying some battle tanks or some air defense systems, it's also to make sure that they can work, that they can function, that they have all the resupplies of ammunition, fuel, spare parts, repair capacity as the offensive moves on. So that's the urgent thing. That will be, of course, a main issue, both in the meeting with the NATO-Ukraine Commission, but also in the contact group earlier the same day. And I expect allies to announce, to make new announcements of further support. I just came from Washington yesterday or this morning, and they made a big new announcement in Washington for further support to Ukraine. Then we will also discuss the more long-term challenges. And that's partly the measures and the decisions that we're looking into whether NATO can take. And I mentioned this multi-year program, when NATO agree to launch a multi-year program with Ukraine to help them move towards NATO. Interoperability, standards, doctrines, all reform of their security and defense institutions. Ukraine has come a long way just by the fact that they are working so closely with NATO allies today. But if we look at the battlefield, there's still a lot of Russian, old Soviet-era equipment, and we need to fulfill or to end or to really implement this big transition, and that's a task of NATO, pointing towards a future where we have a much stronger Ukraine. Then there are also individual NATO allies which are discussing bilateral arrangements with Ukraine that will underpin this same goal. Different types of security assurances, frameworks, and also to ensure that Ukraine, for a long term, receive the weapons, the systems they need to defend themselves. And all of this is, of course, with a clear aim to prevent that when this war ends, that we only see that Russia rest, reconstitute, reallocate, and then again attack Ukraine. So we need also to discuss these more long-term efforts.
Okay, Ansa in the third row. There. Thank you.
Okay, it's okay, thank you. Okay, Secretary General, The Ukrainian counteroffensive has officially started, and you just gave us already a preliminary assessment. But can I ask you what the expectations are realistically amongst the allies? In other words, there is a shared view what success in this campaign is. There are different perspectives at NATO right now. And secondly, there are reports saying that some of the equipment sent to Ukraine has been captured or destroyed, namely Leopards and Bradleys. Is that causing some security concern, given the fact that the Russians now can inspect them and maybe reverse engineering some of our best kits? Thank you.
So we will get updates from Minister Resnikov and also from the generals, the military commanders that will attend the meeting, and by sitting around the same table, getting the same updates, it helps to have a more common and better and deeper understanding of the situation on the battlefield. But then, of course, no one can today predict the developments on the battlefield. Wars are by nature unpredictable. So therefore, it's not possible for anyone to say exactly what will happen in the next days or next weeks. What we already know is that the Ukrainians have made advances. We already know that they have demonstrated their professionalism and dedication, which is impressive. They are delivering above expectations, and they've done that throughout the war. Also liberating land in the north, Kiev, in the east, Kharkiv, and in the south, around Kherson already. Then, of course, when you launch such a big offensive, also against static, well-prepared defense lines, including with minefields and tank ditches and these dragon teats and many other static defense lines, of course there will be casualties. Also when it comes to modern NATO equipment. So there were no plan in a way. No one expected there to be zero casualties. The reality is that this is a fierce fighting going on. And of course also with casualties, also on the Ukrainian side. But the Ukrainians are making gains, and they have proven extremely professional in the way to conduct this offensive, and also in handling the equipment they have they have received from NATO allies.
SVT.
David Boati from SVT, Secretary General. As we speak, there is a meeting going on in Ankara between Finland, Turkey, Sweden and NATO. And meanwhile, Turkish media now reports that Erdogan supposedly has said that we shouldn't expect any shift in the Turkish view on the Swedish NATO admission, as long as there's still, as he says, terrorists demonstrating in the streets of Stockholm. How do you see this, your reaction?
Well, I met President Erdogan in Istanbul a couple of weeks ago. We spent some time together, and of course we also addressed the issue of Swedish membership, and we agreed then in that meeting to convene the meeting of this permanent joint mechanism with Finland, Sweden, Turkey and also NATO present, and my chief of staff is at the meeting. I just spoke to him, and he could report that the atmosphere, the meeting took place in a constructive atmosphere. Some progress have been made, and we will continue to work for the ratification of Sweden as soon as possible. Of course, I'm not in a position to give you any exact timelines or guarantees, but there is a process. It's a good thing that they met today. And I also made it clear many times also in Ankara or Istanbul last time I met President Erdogan, that Sweden has delivered. They have changed the constitution, they have strengthened the counter-terrorist laws and lifted any restrictions on exports of arms to Turkey. And I welcome the fact that Sweden sits down with Turkey and look into how can we ensure that actually more is delivered based on what is already agreed. So, for instance, this week there was a new announcement of the extradition of a person related to the PKK. And again, this is good for the fight against terrorism, but also good for Sweden's efforts to fight organized crime in Sweden, because these groups are very often linked, and they are the same people conducting organized crime in Sweden that are responsible for terrorist actions in Turkey. So we will continue. We will continue to work, and we all would welcome Sweden as a full member. We'd like to welcome them as a full member as soon as possible.
Frankfurt Allgemeine.
Is the dream of Vilnius dead?
It's still possible. I cannot guarantee it, of course, but it's possible to have an agreement in place by the summit, and I'm still working for that to happen.
Frankfurt Allgemeine.
Thanks a lot. Thomas Kutschka, Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung. Secretary General, two questions related to Ukraine, please. First, can you confirm that allies have actually taken the decision in principle to establish the NATO Ukraine Commission? So the upgrade has already been decided in the North Atlantic Council. And the second question, when it comes to security guarantees, so far, delivering weapons and other support to Ukraine has not deterred Russia from continuing its war. What would substantially be different, or what would have to be substantially different, to assure that in the future, after the end of current hostilities? Thank you.
Well, we are working on decisions to be taken at the summit. And we are preparing the summit, and one of the issues which are then now discussed among allies is the issue of strengthening our political cooperation with Ukraine by establishing a NATO-Ukraine Council. But I will not go into details or announce anything today, but I believe personally that this is a good way forward to do more with Ukraine and to work more closely with them. Well, I think what you have to understand that when the war ends, it is extremely important to maximize the likelihood for that this is really an end to the war. Because what we have seen is a Russian pattern of aggression against neighbors in Georgia, but then in 2008, but then against Ukraine, first annexing Crimea, and then a few months later taking control over Eastern Donbass, and then the full-fledged invasion. And we see what President Putin has stated again and again. He doesn't believe in the idea of an independent, sovereign Ukraine. He doesn't believe that Ukraine is a nation. So, of course, if there is some kind of pause to the war, if that only enables the Russians to reconstitute and to rearm and to then attack again, then there is no real peace. So, to maximize to minimize the likelihood for that to happen again, we need to ensure that Ukraine has the capabilities, the weapons, the systems, the training, the command and control, the NATO standards that enables them to deter against any attack themselves, and also, of course, to defend if there is another attack. We're also discussing how we can strengthen the relationship with NATO. I mentioned the multi-year plan to help them move in that direction. And we are discussing also the strengthened political cooperation. And then individual allies are discussing different types of security arrangements. And this will underpin and complement what NATO does. The aim of all these different efforts is to ensure that Russia is not able to attack again.
Antenna 3. Gentleman over there. Yeah.
Yeah, good afternoon, Secretary General. I have a question about the reception tomorrow with the defense industry. In that meeting tomorrow, there will be no presence of a Spanish company, I would like to know why, and also if you are worried about that an ally like Spain could criticize the selection process and also criticize the way you manage. Thanks.
Well, I think this is an event where we will meet the defense industry, small companies, medium-sized and big companies, and it's a relatively small selected group, and of course several allies are not represented there. That's the way these events has to be, because it has to be quite small, and we also want small companies, small firms to be there together with the big ones. So there are several NATO allies who are not present at that, as with the defense industry present at that event. But that's possible also because this is not the only way we engage with the defense industry. We have many different platforms of engaging with the defense industry. I engage myself. I also met defense industry from several of those countries who are not participating in the event tomorrow. And we have the NATO Industry Forum, where companies from all allies participate, and many times several of them from the same ally. And then we are constantly expanding and looking into how we can further engage with the defense industry. So this is one of several events, and several allies are not represented with the defense industry.
Okay, we'll go to the lady in yellow here.
Thank you. Olena Kurankova, Ukrainian public broadcaster. Secretary General, two brief questions. First of all, I'd like to ask about the question that is maybe the most worrying for Ukrainian side. Ukrainian side expects some decisions on the fighter jet supplies, Western-style fighter jet supplies to Ukraine. Do you see that some progress has been done in these discussions since the last meeting in such format? And do you expect some great changes this time? And also, it's very relevant for us to understand that in context of the counteroffensive that Ukraine has been conducting right now. And the second question, you just returned from your meeting with President Biden in the United States. You perhaps may have discussed some guarantee issues, security guarantees for Ukraine. Can you name some concrete things that you've discussed in this context? Thank you.
So fighter jets, as first, NATO allies have delivered fighter jets, but have not delivered fifth-generation fighter jets, modern F-16s and that type of fighter jets. But planes have been delivered, but that's more the older types. Allies have also delivered a lot of other capabilities that can help to control the airspace. That's drones, very advanced air defense systems, but also long-range fires, and especially the cruise missiles, the long-range cruise missiles that the United Kingdom has delivered, and which are making a difference on the battlefield, and which has been used as part of the offensive. So I say this because, yes, planes have been delivered. A lot of other capabilities that help you to control the airspace has been delivered, but not fourth-generation fighter aircraft. But there's a decision, as you know, by several allies, and I welcome that decision. It happened after consultations, that training will start. And of course, when training starts, and allies have also made it clear that training may start soon, this summer, and I also expect that training for the pilots will be one issue that will be addressed also tomorrow at the meeting of the contact group. Then that provides us with the option also to deliver planes. Exactly when and how that will happen, no decision has been made, but the training is the first step, and is important. Then the other question was, well, in a meeting with President Biden, of course, we discussed Ukraine, both the urgent needs to continue to deliver unprecedented level of support, and I welcome the U.S. announcement yesterday for more advanced air defense systems, ammunition, artillery, and many other types of support they announced yesterday. And this comes on top of announcement by European allies just over the last days from Denmark, from the Netherlands, from Germany and other allies, which also have made recent announcements to step up. Then we also discussed, of course, the more long-term aspects, and in one way I already addressed them. This is about the framework, this is about the long-term commitments, this is about interoperability, the transition, and there NATO will play a role together with the support and the commitment by individual NATO allies.
Okay. Reuters?
Thank you. Sabine Siebold with Reuters. Secretary General, you just announced a defense production action plan to address shortfalls in NATO stocks. Where do you see the biggest gaps at the moment? Is it artillery ammunition or is it air defenses? Maybe you can work out on that a little bit. And you also said you were aiming to enhance the interoperability of ammunitions and equipment in the alliance. What role does standardization play, or a lack of standardization in this respect? And what role will the meeting with the industry bosses tomorrow play there?
So, since last fall, it was obvious that the war in Ukraine was going to be a war of attrition, and a war that was actually going to last for quite a long time. And then we started to focus on the need to ramp up production. Because so far, NATO allies have provided substantial, significant support to Ukraine, but most of that support has been provided by depleting our own stocks of different types of ammunition, and not least 155, the standard NATO ammunition, but also, for instance, ammunition for air defense systems, NASAMS, Patriots, and other systems. And it became obvious many months ago that it cannot continue like that. Because our stocks were running lower and lower, and that makes it hard both to continue to provide support to Ukraine, but also to have enough in stock to ensure that we have necessary to uphold our own collective defense. Therefore, since last fall, we have been working on how to ramp up production, and we have engaged closely with the defense industry in many different countries. More and more allies now are signing contracts, because what the industry need is not only signals and political messages, they need actually contracts. And I'm glad to see that more and more contracts are signed. Then what we have done from the NATO side is also to ensure that we buy more of these systems, weapons together. And we have ongoing joint procurement projects in NATO for 155, just for 155. Of $1 billion as we speak. And that's allies that have gone together and buy the 155 ammunition together through the NATO Support and Procurement Agency. And by doing that joint procurement, you can have bigger scale and reduce the price in the market. So this is tried and tested structures in NATO with joint procurement, which we're now ramping up, scaling up to be able to provide continued support to Ukraine. Then we will, on Friday, agree new capability targets for, or expect that ministers on Friday will agree capability targets for battle-decisive ammunition, which is perhaps one of the most important shortfalls. And again, this is something NATO has done for decades. But what we saw was that the existing capability targets, which we have for each and every ally, specific numbers, they were too low. So now we have an extraordinary round where we have consulted with allies, and they have agreed, or they hopefully will agree on Friday, to then lift this target substantially. And that will also then give the nations the guidelines they need to sign contracts with industry and then have long-term delivery of battle-decisive ammunition. Standardization, a core responsibility for NATO. We have always worked hard on that, but since ammunition, weapons are constantly developed, refined, that sometimes undermines the interoperability. So therefore we need to actually do more. And part of what we call the NATO 2030, to also strengthen the NATO structures, is actually to have more people, more experts, to work on the urgent need to standardize or to ensure full interchangeability and standardization of the NATO weapons. And all these elements are, and many others, are also in the action plan for the transatlantic defense industry.
Okay, Politico.
Thank you very much, Lily from Politico. Just to follow up on that theme, is it accurate that Turkey is currently blocking agreement on both the regional plans and the Defense Industry Action Plan? And if so, what is the way forward? Thank you.
First of all, I never confirm what is going on in the internal processes in NATO. Before every meeting, before every summit, there are a lot of documents that has to be negotiated. And it always takes some time, and it always takes a bit more time than I would like. But I've been used to that, because we end up with good documents and good agreements. So first of all, I'll not confirm which allies do this or have this or that position in the different processes. But I'm absolutely confident that when we meet in Vilnius, we will have substantial agreement on these things and move forward, as we have done, especially since 2014, with the biggest adaptation. But all the decisions on the battle groups, on the high readiness, on the strengthening of our command structure, which has been strengthened significantly over these years, there have always been differences. And therefore had taken some time to negotiate. But NATO is the most successful, the strongest alliance in history, because we have always been able to adapt and change when the world is changing. Now the world is changing, and we're able to agree on that adaptation. And that will also happen in Vilnius.
Okay, we'll go to Radio Free Europe.
Denis Dermenji for Radio Free Europe. Secretary General, on 1st June during the European Political Community Summit, NATO AVAX systems secured Moldova's airspace because the country is unable. Moldova is close and long-standing partner to NATO, but during Russia's invasion of Ukraine, Russian missiles repeatedly flown through the Moldovan sky, some even falling. Can NATO, the allies, help Moldova acquire a modern air defense system, considering that considering requests from Moldovan leaders late last year, and what options have NATO for such countries?
Well, first of all, I'm glad that NATO was able to help to secure the airspace of Moldova under that very important meeting with our AWACS surveillance planes, which actually play a very important role to get a full air picture, and also to coordinate efforts of different NATO allies and their air forces. Second, Moldova is a partner of NATO, and we have agreed that we should step up our partnership and what we do together. And of course, we'll look into also how we can help you to reform and to strengthen your own defense and security institutions. And also, of course, part of that can also be related to protecting your airspace. So this is something we will constantly assess and sit down with Moldova and discuss what type of support that we can provide.
Okay, we have a gentleman over here. Third row, yeah.
China Media Group, Mr. Secretary General, multiple media sources indicate that NATO allies are currently divided over the plan to set up a liaison office in Japan. Can you please provide more information on that? NATO consistently emphasizes its role as a defensive regional alliance that does not seek geographic expansion or Thus, NATO's potential presence in Asia indicates a shift in its core defense nature. And my last question, if I may, what we have observed here in Europe is that the ongoing enlargement of NATO does not guarantee stability on the continent. So how can you ensure a similar outcome will be avoided in Asia if NATO goes to the continent? Thank you very much.
I think we need to understand that NATO is an alliance of North America and Europe, and NATO will remain an alliance of North America and Europe. It's not an issue at all to make NATO a global organization with members from, for instance, from Asia. No one has been in favor of that. That's not an issue at all. But this region, North America and Europe, we face global threats and challenges. everything from cyber to terrorism, but also, of course, the security consequences of the rise of China, where China is investing heavily in new modern military capabilities. We see that threatening neighbors, and we see also that China is coming closer to us. And that's the reason why we, in our strategic concept, state clearly that China is a challenge to our values, to our security, and to our interests. And also why we have decided to further strengthen our partnership with our Indo-Pacific partners, Japan, South Korea, New Zealand, and Australia. They are invited, the leaders of these countries, to come to Vilnius, and we appreciate very much to strengthen the partnership with them. NATO is a defensive alliance. NATO will remain the alliance of North America and Europe, but as a defensive alliance, we see strong value in strengthening the partnership with our Indo-Pacific partners.
Associated Press. Up there. Yeah. Up there. Yeah.
Lorne Cook from the Associated Press. You mentioned on Friday, Secretary General, the meeting of the Nuclear Planning Group. I understand the Nuclear Planning Group kind of meets regularly, that we normally expect those meetings. This one seems to be in response to something else. I know it's difficult to talk about it, but is there a little more that you could tell us about your concerns and why this extraordinary meeting?
Well, as you said, we meet on a regular basis to ensure that our nuclear deterrent remains safe, secure, and effective. And that's an ongoing process in NATO. At the same time, what of course we have seen is the reckless and dangerous rhetoric from Russia on the potential use of nuclear weapons. And we've also seen the fact that Russia has destroyed the nuclear arms control architecture that we developed over decades, since the Cold War and up to now. Not so many years ago, a few years ago, the INF Treaty that banned all intermediate range weapons also didn't function anymore because Russia violated and deployed missiles that violated the treaty. So now this treaty has stopped to function, is no longer valid. And then Russia announced some weeks ago that they are suspending the New START agreement, which is the agreement that bans or put limits on all the long-range nuclear missiles. And then they announced that they will deploy short-range missiles to Belarus. I condemn these decisions, and they are taking us in the wrong direction. NATO believes in arms control. We believe that it is important to have limits, regulations, and not least also transparency. But Russia is walking away from the different agreements we have developed over many years. So therefore, we, of course, are vigilant. We follow closely what Russia is doing. We are monitoring what they do. And we're also conveying very clear to them that the nuclear war cannot be won and should never be fought. As we monitor what they do, we of course so far then we also assess what we should do, but so far we haven't seen any changes in their posture that requires any changes in our nuclear posture.
Thank you very much. That's all we have time for today, colleagues, but there will be opportunities for more questions during the ministerial, so we'll see you there. Thank you. Thanks so much.